I don't mind this, or at least I don't feel it's as bad AFFIX as I thought initially, because I really hated Infested, and I was kind of thinking of this being as an Infested 2.0, but this actually really changes the routing, which I think is going to be really interesting. It's going to be painful at the start, but it's gonna make these old dungeons feel like new because of new ways of doing it, if you can kind of understand what I mean. And it's possible that it will change some of the meta, which is very, very needed, because there's very little meta variations that are happening right now in the game. So I don't think I'll hate this. I think it'll be really annoying at the start, but I think over the time it might be interesting, the choices that you make. It's just that the downside is, like, for higher keys, you'll probably be spending a lot of time on meta dungeon tools trying to figure out the most optimal route for your group. Hello guys, welcome to my new video, and today we'll be looking at the new Season 3 AFFIX Beguiling, and we'll be looking at the rewards that you get as part of completing these dungeons with these hard affixes.
We did it!
Let's see what kind of loot we're gonna get. Let's see what kind of loot we get after the testing, boys.
420, dude. Some an upgrade. I'm coining. I coined it. Nothing. It's actually the same thing.
First of all, there hasn't been really a lot of media or kind of attention towards this new Season 3 AFFIX, just because everyone's playing Classic. No one really cares about what's going on with the BfA. But I decided to kind of cover it because, let's be honest, Season 3 AFFIX or seasonal affixes are an important part of Mythic Plus, and it's going to really kind of determine whether you like the season or not. To a very similar extent, Beguiling itself, I can compare it to Infested on steroids. And a lot of people, maybe they didn't realize they hated Infested, but I didn't mind Infested for the longest time. I didn't mind doing Season 1 Infested, and then Reaping came about, and then I think kind of realized, hey, Infested is absolute garbage. It was so annoying. It slowed down the dungeons. It didn't feel good. It was just overall a terrible affix. But I only realized that after Season 1 was over, after Infested was over, and I've been trying to think, I've been trying to decide whether I actually like Beguiling. I've tried it out on PTR, I did a couple of dungeons, and the last couple of days I've spent thinking whether this affix has potential, whether it's going to be good, whether I like it, whether I think it's fun. And honestly, I don't know. I kind of came into this affix thinking that it's going to be pretty crap, because straight away, just a little overview for the people who just never heard of this before. Beguiling, you're going to have 3 ads. So they're kind of called the emissaries, but you have this ad here, and I'll show you like video clips or whatever. This is the knockback ad. This is the way I refer to it because of how we tried it, how we tested on PTR. You just have to deal damage to this ad to knock it away from the group of ads that it surrounds. You can see this little like a blue bubble. If there are ads within this blue bubble, those ads or the damage you deal to those ads is going to be reflected back to you. So it makes sense that, hey, you need to push this ad all the way back, and to push this ad you need to deal damage. So I was playing Boomkin on PTR, and I was kind of like, you know, for the testing purposes, I was just moonfiring it. I was just constantly applying moonfire, and it kept being knocked back, knocked back, knocked back. Then the tank pulled the ads, and we killed the ads, and then this emissary itself, you cannot kill it. At the start I was so confused. It doesn't lose any HP. It just disappears or teleports out after 30 seconds. So it's pure ad control here. You don't have to deal anything with it. You just have to kind of knock it away. And I was kind of thinking about which role is going to be great for it, because as a range DPS, first of all, this is straight away seems like, hey, range DPS is going to be on this duty of pushing the ad back. And it's like, okay, Blizzard is trying, straight away I'm thinking, Blizzard is trying to make ranged more appealing in 5-man content. But then I realized that, hey, maybe you have a Resto Druid, and a Resto Druid can be on this duty of just applying moonfires and pushing it back. Another concept of this ad is that, which actually happened in the PTR dungeon, is that I end up pushing the ad too far into another mob, and we end up pulling additional mobs. Now, it was fine because the ad ended up teleporting really kind of soon, so it didn't really matter, but I can already see Pugs maybe pushing it too far, or like not dealing with it properly. Or maybe if you have like an all melee comp, I don't even know how an all melee comp can deal with it. If you don't have ranged attacks or anything like that, if you don't have pushback, not super terrible. It's not really hard to deal with it. Again, prefers ranged. Maybe your healer is going to be responsible for dealing with this ad, because it prevents a DPS to focus on it, because you need to kind of keep applying damage on it. Then I don't really want to talk about the shadow ad yet, because I feel shadow ad has the biggest potential of changing Mythic plus meta. And we'll talk about the meta as well very soon, but I feel it has the biggest potential. So I want to talk about the CC ad. So this is actually quite irrelevant in a lot of ways. So the ad itself can be CC'd, but the ad creates this aura around the targets where it's placed that prevents you from using any kind of CC on those ads. So you can't silence them, you can't interrupt them, you can't disorient, you can't stun them, but the ad itself you can't CC. So what we end up doing with a rogue end up sapping the ad, we end up pulling the ads all the way back and killing them. Now, it didn't really make sense because at least in the Underworld dungeon that we were doing, the ad placements didn't really matter. Like, it didn't really matter that a lot of the ads cannot be CC'd. You can just nuke it down with everything. But you can already see that in some other dungeons, let's say in Atal Dazar, if you have this emissary of the tides placed beside the dragons that kind of fear, you can't interrupt them. So you have to deal with the ad. You either have to DPS it down or you can CC it. So I can see straight away things like, sap work really, really well. The other thing about it is that the ad itself has a lot of HP. And we tried to kill it. We actually killed it multiple times. But it does not give you any percentage towards completing a dungeon. So it's actually wasted DPS to really focus on it. Or at least it seems that for a lot of the times, just nuking it down as part of an AoE pack seems to be the most efficient way to do it, unless you actually need to CC the ads that it affects. A lot of the times Reaping, the people who enjoyed Reaping was really simple. It was really simple. You kind of knew the route already. Now with these kind of affixes, with these two mobs, with these two ads, by the way, the two ads that I've mentioned, they can be completely bypassed. You can shroud past them, which is actually one of the reasons that I think rogues are still going to be very, very important. Rogues can also sap them. So I still see rogues being in the meta for Beguiling. But you can see that based on every week, you have to look at meta dungeon tools. You have to practice your routes. You'll have to see whether these, emissary of the tides is placed in a good location. Can you pull it with the trash bag and just nuke it down? And then the last ad, which in my opinion is by far the most important ad, and the one that I'm not 100% certain on. So if people are watching this video, leave comments below and things like that, whether if you find better ways of dealing with it. So the shadow ad basically does this cast that I can't even remember how long the cast was. I think it was around 5 seconds, 6 seconds. It was a relatively long cast, and it does like 50% of your HP. And it keeps stacking. And it's absolutely insane how much damage it does. Basically, the only way to deal with it is to either, and hear me out, is to either nuke it down. First of all, to nuke it down, I think he had like 2 million HP or something along those lines on a plus 10 Underworld that we did. Now it seems that like the plus 10 was scaled up. I'm not 100% certain because the item levels were higher and things like that. So maybe the plus 10 felt harder, but one of the ways is to nuke it down. So you can't really survive 3 casts. You can survive 1, 50% HP, then the healer heals everyone up, and then the second cast is probably gonna get everyone down to like 10%, and then you can't really survive a third cast. You can't take the direct hits from it. So you have to nuke it down. Like single target burst DPS for this is, the requirement seems quite insane. It's absolutely doable, but it seems quite insane. Now, the problem happens is that if you do not kill it in that time. So one of the ways of dealing with it is line of sight. It works with line of sight. You can go behind a wall. It's doing a cast. It finishes the cast. You can come out of the wall and start DPSing it. This is a direct, in my opinion, this is a direct advantage to ranged DPS. Because melee have to go from, they have to get close to it, they have to go out, it takes a long time. Ranged DPS can basically just dot them up or, DPS them while the cast is happening, hide behind the wall, the AoE happens, the DPS goes back and DPSs. Now, this only happens if you can't nuke it down in one go. And we had a lot of shenanigans happening with this mob because we weren't sure how to deal with it, because he has a 60-yard range. It's a long range, and basically, if he keeps casting the buff, it keeps stacking. So at a certain point, just one cast is gonna kill you instantly. So there are multiple ways to deal with it, in my opinion. You can actually run past it if you have, like, I don't know, Guardian Druid, Stampeding Roar, and things like that. Your whole party can run past the mob during the cast time, because the cast time is quite long. You can nuke it down with really good single target burst DPS. Keep in mind that, at least for our testing in Underoath, we had bolstering and they were bolstering. So I'm not sure if these ads are supposed to be affected by other affixes, but 100% they were getting bolstered at the start, or at least for us. Another way is that line of sight DPS, line of sight DPS, line of sight DPS, which really kind of, it makes ranged more appealing. But that's if you don't have that single target DPS. Or you could just run past it. Again, these mobs have sight, so you cannot kind of invis. Now, the location of the shadow mobs, again, just like everything I said in this whole video, the location of these 3 mobs is really important, because sometimes you can just bypass these shadow mobs. You don't even have to do them. In Underoath, we possibly could have bypassed a lot of them. We also tested out Waycrest Manor. There seems to be, like, the shadow mobs, there's not a lot of them. There's not that many of them in a dungeon, but they might be strategically placed in places where you'd be like, you know, in a Tal Desar, where everybody, when the dungeon starts, everyone goes on the right, because that's the route everyone's been doing. Now, there's a high chance that Blizzard might implement a way that, hey, why don't you take the left route instead, because it's going to be easier, there's not going to be shadow mobs and things like that. This is what Blizzard is trying to do. It's trying to make all dungeons, what these dungeons are, the routes that you have done hundreds and hundreds of times, they're trying to spice it up. They're trying to say, like, hey, try and take a different route, because it's not going to have the shadow mob, it's going to have easier mobs. And to be honest, these emissary ads, there is a lot of them. Nearly every second pack seems to have these emissary mobs in them, and it kind of changes the way that you deal with these ads. So my overall opinion in terms of the meta and everything, it's going to change the way that you do Mythic Plus a lot. Whether I like it or not, I'm still not 100% certain. This is, like I mentioned, Infested on steroids, but at the same time, it kind of makes you think on how to deal with some of these ads. Like, for example, the knockback ad can be pretty easy, but if you knock it back into an additional trash bag, that might be problematic. Like I mentioned, shadow ads, or the shadow emissary, seems to be the most interesting one, and it really is going to depend on how much single target burst you have. In higher keys, I can almost see that it might be impossible, like, doing really high keys to burst this ad down in, like, the 10 seconds that you have or whatever. So you might have to bring in a ranged DPS to help out. And you might have to bring in a ranged DPS to help out with a knockback ad. And then you have the CC mob, or the CC ad, which is really not that impressive until you get really bad pairings. Imagine teaming and getting paired up with a trash bag that needs hard CC, and then you get this emissary. So what do? Do you CC the emissary and pull it back? Most likely. Most likely you will have to have a hard CC. So that's how I see it. The meta, in my opinion, is still probably going to be somewhat similar. I still feel rogues being important. Maybe assassination is going to be more important right now, because there's no, you know, outlaw cheesing DPS with reaping. You still need that shroud. Shroud seems like it's more important than ever, because you can skip 2 out of the 3 ads. You still need that hard CC with SAP. I know monks and demon hunters can provide hard CC, so it's not that big of an issue. Single target DPS seems to be more important. And the shadow one, that's the one that I'm most interested in. It feels like it's a direct kind of Blizzard's way of saying, hey, if you don't have the single target burst potential, you'll have to bring range DPS who will line of sight DPS, line of sight DPS, line of sight DPS kind of deal. Or maybe people will just skip shadow ones completely, because you can actually do that with some cheesing. You can actually skip them completely as well with shadow melts and things like that. So maybe groups with heavy melee DPS comps or no single target DPS will be like, hey, we're just gonna do this dungeon. we're gonna look at the MDT tools and we're gonna skip every single shadow one. And we're gonna, you know, use a rogue to shroud past everything else, and we're gonna do this mass AoE pulse. So maybe the meta could actually stay still very, very similar. It's all depending based on how bad these void or shadow ads are going to be placed in a dungeon. Are they going to be skippable? If they're not going to be skippable, maybe range DPS, maybe single target DPS like Boomkins, balanced through single target DPS is pretty good, are going to be emerging. I would love to hear your opinion, especially about the Shadow Emissary. I'd love to hear your findings. Please leave comments below and things like that. I'll try and answer them. Thank you for watching this guide.